Hi, Kim Buck.
Well, hi there. How's everybody doing today? How are you, Tammy?
I'm hanging in this unique time that we're existing in. So, yeah, but
For sure.
yeah, and it's been a while since you and I have been together. So I'm grateful to have this hour with you.
Same. I'm so grateful to have you back and glad to be here and hopefully being able to share some insight with those of you who are here, whether you're here for the first time or you've been here many times before. I'm glad you're here. I will reiterate that this webinar is it's really good based on the questions, you guys participating, and I can definitely share information, but I think it's more successful when we're all sharing and you ask questions and I do my best to respond. So glad to be here. I work in Mesa, so I'm the clinical director at a decent sized agency in Mesa, along with I have a private practice, but I work a lot with addiction and betrayal trauma. That's kind of my thing. That's my specialty. So Prodependence really resonated with me when I met Dr. Rob and learned about it wasn't even published at the time, but his up and coming book and that paradigm, that perspective, and really excited to be on the train with Prodependence and helping to teach about it and hopefully change some of the language and some of the recovery for partners and loved ones. So
let's talk a little bit about that train because, so talk about the project.
Okay, so Dr. Rob and I are collaborating on a book that will be published in 2021. It's a Prodependent book. It's going to be the clinical guide to Prodependence. So it will be available. It will be helpful to clinicians who are treating people and also probably the general public and academia, people who are learning. So they'll learn a different way, which is super exciting. So we're working diligently on that this year and hopefully we'll have that out along with a lot of other things. We've got other projects in the peripheral, but that's the main one this next year. So.
Well, and I think it's really important, and I think that will be part of this transformation of changing the language, because if new clinical people are coming in and are learning the different language and why it's important, that can help reframe how we work with loved ones. So it's very important work. So I'm really excited to be on the train. So
train has left the station.
There you go. So we have some questions. The first one is, I have a young adult son who I'm working on rebuilding a relationship with. Would it be inappropriate to recommend recovery to him? I've mentioned my own recovery. He's supportive, but I know he's using and I want to show unconditional love. It hurts me to see him using. Any suggestions? So far, I have not badgered him about recovery. That's a great question.
It's a really good question. And it's awesome that you're being thoughtful about what's appropriate to share and what's not, which tells me that shows a lot about your recovery and your sense of boundaries and what's healthy with an adult son. I have adult kids as well, and it's always calibrating what should I say and when and how do I help. So I would say absolutely. You can mention recovery if you've already shared yours, unless you don't have a relationship where you guys have talked about his addiction or he is not open to that conversation. If you have a good communication between the two of you, and I would definitely offer or maybe just ask, are you interested? Are you interested in some resources or things that might be helpful to you? When I don't know for sure, I always ask. I have something I wanted to tell you, but I don't want to cross any lines. And I don't want you to think I'm trying to control or govern your life, but I love you. And I'm wondering if you're open to any, a conversation about that or feedback or whatever you have to offer.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, I've been there. I see you're hurting. I'm concerned. Obviously, as your parent, I want what's best for you. We all travel our own pathway, and it takes what it takes. But gosh, I sure would hope that you could get on a path differently, quicker, whatever. And I'm here for you, and I can help you find the right resources, whatever. Being neutral, but I do like that non-judgmental, but on some level it's extending the hand of recovery to another person, but as we all know too, they have to be at least a little bit open to hearing it. But sometimes it's like you plant the seeds, and they see even if they're not ready yet. So continue doing what you're doing for your recovery, and that's sometimes the only big book people are really going to read is what we're doing. So
True. And I would say as well, appropriate levels of vulnerability. Our adult kids or kids don't want to know about certain aspects of our life, but there's ways that we can share without giving details. I think that's the boundary thing, where we're able to say, I would love to share with you some of the things that have helped me. Obviously I've been in my own recovery, and so I would love to share some of the things I've learned about my journey, because it might not be about giving him ideas about what he should do, but it might just be appropriately sharing some of my journey. I've learned about boundaries. I've learned about how I deal with my stress, and I've learned how to balance my life a little better and how to get support when I need it. I think, and this is why that's important to my world, to my recovery. And I think kind of mentoring that, instead of, it's hard to know that mentor and parent, I'm sensitive to that because I'm in that same role a lot of times. So I think I have to figure out what's appropriate for me to share and how much vulnerability would be helpful in this situation about my story.
Yeah, well, and I think, I always share that in going to meetings, even if the details are different, the feelings are the same, the feelings of shame, the feelings of, lack of having any worth, and, all of those kind of things. So, sharing from that, I always said to the kids too, it's like, if you ever need help, no questions asked. I'm there for you, and I will help you find the right resources. I may not be the right resource, but I can help you find that. And I was really serious about that, and they knew it. That it would, I want to help them, and it won't be, you should have known better than, whatever. So I do think that you can come from those, but it is the parent child, or the another addict who's in trouble. So
yes, thank you for your question.
Next question. Can you talk about some of the issues that underlie sex addiction that need to be addressed by the addict? For an addict who doesn't have a therapist, can you suggest some resources, books, podcasts, etc., that can give insight on some of these? Ooh, that's a challenging question. So
that's a very big question. It covers a wide range of things, but I can at least give you the beginnings, maybe some ideas to get started. There's a lot of issues that underlie sex addiction, and there's some that are pretty general to most addicts, and then there are some that are very specific, to that particular person. Usually the first and foremost thing that they have to address is their deceit, getting honest with themselves, getting honest with other people, their desire to make changes in their life. That's almost the very first thing, obviously, because, therapy and all that, reading resources are only as good as somebody who is motivated for change. And that's hard because addicts can change from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. It can just change. And that can be really frustrating for a partner too. But early on, some of the underlying issues could be a variety of things. It's attachment. It's ruptures in attachment in my connection with my primary people in my life, my caretakers, people that matter to me growing up. Shame fuels that attachment wound, a sense of feeling unworthy or not good enough, and obviously when I engage in certain behaviors, it fuels that faulty belief system inside of me that's all steeped in shame. And by shame, I mean unhealthy beliefs about myself, believing in my unworthiness and my unlovability. And so that usually, it all kind of interplays. And when I develop a behavior that I think is going to be socially unacceptable or going to get me in trouble, or God's going to be mad or whatever, and I go underground with it, like masturbating or looking at pornography, or however this starts for most addicts is usually fairly young. prepubescent or pubescent, usually in those years, then it goes underground and it intensifies, because oftentimes my shame intensifies. So my need to have relief from that shame intensifies. And what gives me temporary relief is the behavior. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be pornography. There's lots of things it could be. In the case of a sex addict, it's usually sexual behavior of some sort. That's some of the very foundational things. As far as underlying I'm looking here at that question. For an addict who doesn't have a therapist, suggest resources. I think Seeking Integrity is one of the best resources out there. You have found one of the best resources. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a part of it, and I'm not getting paid to say that. So
that's really true too.
That you know that I just donate my time here. So the Seeking Integrity has a tremendous amount of resource, and you're getting education and ideas and feedback from some of the best therapists that I know. Dr. Rob to many of the other therapists that work in this field. So anything that you can read about sex addiction, there's so many. Patrick Carnes' books are usually very good to start with, Out of the Shadows, and there's so many. And I'm sure on Seeking Integrity, I know they have resources there. So maybe Tammy can put that in the chat where to find that. The podcasts, the webinars, the books, yeah. I would encourage, if an addict isn't ready to see a therapist or go that way, to get involved in a support group. Sometimes I call that the soft entry into therapy. Because sometimes you get into a support group and you hear from other people and you're learning from their healing and their recovery, and you're actually learning from their therapy too, like what they're learning from their therapist. And so it can sometimes invite somebody who may be resistant to therapy into therapy, because it will, if it's a long-term true sex addiction, it's going to require therapeutic intervention for long-term healing. That's what we know from the research. That's not just me touting therapy. It really does take, it takes therapy with qualified therapists who know what they're doing. They need to specialize in sex addiction, and you need to ask them what training they've had, what certifications they have, what special education they've had to do that. A lot of people, I think, claim that they treat addiction or certain things and that they really haven't had any specific training. So that wouldn't necessarily qualify me just because I'm a therapist, just because I have a license. So those are my thoughts to start off. It's a really broad question. If you have more specific questions, please type them in. If I haven't answered what you were hoping to get, I'm happy to elaborate further.
Well, and I did in the chat, I put the link to the podcast on sex, love, and addiction. There are so many podcasts that have people talking about those underlying issues. Like Enid Gray talks about neglect, and it's neglect. We talk about like neglect, abandonment, trauma, and abuse. Those are kind of, a catch-all, but go to the attachment issues, that Kim was talking about. And, the clients that come to the Seeking Integrity treatment have those issues. And 100% agree with Kim that it's not, that, and we have often so many people that go, if I just learn about this, if you get the headspace, then you're going to understand and be able to do it differently. And that has not been my experience. My experience is, it's really, addressing some of those things. Eddie Caparucci, he does a webinar on here too, but he wrote a book called Going Deeper, and he's got information about our inner children, and he's identified 9 different types of inner child, and he gives some strategies on if we all have a combination of inner children, that, and if you start identifying patterns of, okay, that one's popping up, that's all stuff that's great, but that's not stuff that's in early recovery. Anyone that's down the path a bit. So finding someone who is qualified to help. But again, what Kim said about, a recovery group, the Dr. Rob talks about the opposite of addiction is attachment, healthy attachment. And so If we're isolated in our addiction, we're not going to get out of addiction by remaining isolated. So just reading a book, just listening to podcasts, all great support, all super helpful, but we really need to heal in community. So finding different spots to connect to other recovering people, will be really helpful.
Absolutely. And there is a lot to it. And there's kind of a specific path. We cover certain things with addicts as they're ready, right? As they can absorb. So in those early stages, just getting out of denial, understanding my patterns, why, getting some support and accountability, those are such crucial things, because some of the uncovering, like Tammy's talking about, learning about some of the wounding that may have contributed to the behaviors are going to come as I stabilize, as an addict stabilizes their sobriety and their recovery, and they have support, because it's true, the opposite of addiction is connection, is attachment. And so getting at least some support, if not therapeutic support, some sort of community support, getting a community around and encouraging that around the addict would be the first step. And I guess even if I'm the addict, if I'm the partner of the addict, it would be maybe even setting some boundaries and saying, I don't know what your path's going to look like, but I need you to be on one. If you're tired of living that way, or, it's running its course and you feel less and less safe in the relationship.
Or just tired. I mean, I hear all the time, people that are just, this has been going on for, and he started 3 years ago, and like it still is the same. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just got to be so wearing, to not have it be, oh, I'm starting to see things be different. So
I just want to back one other quick thing I want to say is that those things that contribute to addictive behavior are not excuses either for the behavior. I think sometimes it can be frustrating to hear, oh, well, this happened and this happened, and so of course he or she's going to do these things, and that's not necessarily true. There are people who have similar wounding who don't pick that path. So it's not an excuse, it's a helpful explanation, and it helps to address those so that it's easier to overcome the behavioral patterns that occur in addictive processes. But that isn't an excuse like, okay, you just act out until we get to your childhood, or until we find out ways you were neglected. We actually need to get sober and figure out how to do that before we can even gain insight. Because what happens, and this has probably been brought up in other webinars, so, but when an addiction or impulsive compulsive behavior starts, emotional growth is hindered. It sort of stops in a lot of ways. Because I will have partners that say, I live with somebody who's a fully grown, awesome adult in every way, but except when he or she gets like upset, or gets caught and I confront them, all of a sudden I feel like I'm dealing with my teenager. And I will often say, well, if that's where the addiction started at 13, 14, 15, emotionally, you probably are dealing with an emotional teenager, because I'm taking away my emotion when I'm acting out in an addiction. And so what would happen if I spent from the age 13 to however old, 50, I never used my right arm? What would happen to that right arm? It would
atrophy.
Yeah. It'd become weak. It would become, it would not be very useful to me. And if you think about emotions in that way, if I've stopped using my emotions, because that's sort of a muscle that we build, is emotional muscle. We learn how to deal with sadness and loneliness and hunger and all the things that aren't comfortable for us humans, then I would be really immature in my responses to emotion, no matter my age, if I've been using an addiction to numb those out. So that's an explanation, again, not an excuse, but maybe that's helpful.
It is very helpful. And I've heard lots of things, but that was a helpful explanation, about, stunting the emotional growth. And I use often, it's a reason, not an excuse. So it does help give an explanation, but it doesn't, it isn't, oh, you get, carte blanche to just do what you want to do. The other thing I was thinking too is, like you said, we have to address this before we get to those, childhood things. And my experience is that if people try to address the deep wounding, they're so triggered and they don't have the bandwidth to be able to deal with those emotions. They haven't had the practice. They don't have the tools. They haven't developed those muscles. So then it's relapse. So it really is important to create that, that foundation of recovery on which to, then start picking away at those underlying, things. But that takes time. So. Okay, here's one. Are you familiar with insecure attachment, and can you talk a bit about this in Prodependence manner? My spouse and I are getting back together, and I see huge difference in him, but I was the Prodependent for years and took care of him first, and I'm having some subconscious fears and restlessness, and I don't know exactly why.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I can tell you why. It's
Go ahead.
No, I'm just like, I would absolutely be fearful. There would, like it takes so much time to rebuild that trust, but please talk about insecure attachment, et cetera, too, please.
I want to say really quickly, too, just to add to that, prodependence is such a cool thing because in our history, you would hear this a lot, like, oh, I was so codependent with him, or, I'm just being so codependent, or she's being so codependent. I guess that means that you were doing unhealthy things because you care. I don't know. I don't really know what that means. I think that's probably the easiest way to say it. I don't think we're prodependent. I think naturally we care. And I don't think that necessarily needs a label. Prodependence is a way to describe how we naturally care. Which is meaning it doesn't need a diagnosis. It doesn't need a label. It doesn't need a pathology. You know what I mean? We care. Prodependence just talks about our need for attachment. So what you're referring to with insecure attachment is, prodependence is an attachment-based perspective. It's an attachment-based model. So insecure attachment is obviously the fear of connecting, attaching and connecting with someone due to ruptures in my attachments before, my lack of trust that it will remain there, that it will stay there. So I am anxious about my attachments. I'm anxious about my connection, and I feel fearful about it a lot. And so I preoccupy about that. And therefore I can't really engage in the relationship. I'm always worried about losing it, or I'm worried about it leaving me, or them leaving me, or whatever. So insecure attachment, and attachment is, prodependence is all about attachment, because it says we're wired for connection. We're wired for attachment. That is natural. That's why we feel so restless and fearful when we are learning to trust again, when we have found out that somebody who we love has betrayed that trust and has been struggling, has been failing in some way. We get fearful because we love, because we want to be attached. And we realize that their first love may not be me. It's probably the thing that they were doing. They were pouring all of their attention and time and whatever into the unhealthy behavior and not into the relationship. And that's a really painful realization. We want to obviously, we want to learn how to cope with the hurt and figure out how to process the hurt and where to put the hurt. So if we choose to stay in the relationship, we can have some peace in it. And that's what the healing journey looks like for a partner. Really is grieving the losses, figuring out how to love somebody and hate somebody sometimes at the same time, because that's a thing. Sometimes we love someone and can't stand them all in the same moment. I can't tell you how often I hear a partner goes, I love her, but I can't stand her right now. I hear that frequently. And that's a pretty common feeling when you are so torn. You want somebody, but you are so hurt by what they're doing. Teaches you how to get support for when that person is not attached and and is disconnected from you. So you have other ways to get support that are healthy. Just teaches you how to set healthy boundaries and when to say no and when to draw lines and where and why. You know, teaches how your shame might work in the relationship, how your feelings of insecurity and where they come up, and your attachment, you know, what attachment wounds that you may have or may have brought into the relationship, but also what wounds you have developed inside the relationship. When somebody betrays in this manner, it creates a huge attachment wound for the partner. Huge. Because the person I thought I could count on, I now can't count on in certain ways, and sometimes every way. But that would be what I would say about prodependence and attachment, insecure attachment. I think our goal is to learn how to, number one, not judge ourselves and each other because we have responses to breaches of attachment, but also how to healthily attach once the addiction is being addressed. And some of that attachment work happens later. I will say there's a lot of preliminary work as far as the addiction has to be addressed, the betrayal has to be addressed, and then rebuilding connection and learning how to attach is sometimes down the road a bit.
So do you feel like, what is your experience with, if this relationship is not a secure attachment, is that going to translate to other relationships? I mean, so I'm thinking like if this has not been a trustworthy relationship, there's been hurt, there's reasons to not trust it. Would someone with insecure attachment, I mean, I hate to label, but like, would you go, oh, this person has insecure attachment, or this relationship, you know, is challenged right now, but, you know, I have secure attachments with other people. Thoughts on that? I guess I'm curious.
Really good question. I think it could be either. I think you could definitely just have insecure attachment in your primary relationship and have very good secure attachments in others. I do think that's absolutely possible. I also think depending on the level of wounding, you know, in that attachment, sometimes I can transfer that to other relationships, meaning I can create fear in some of my other, sometimes we call it transference. We kind of transfer that fear to other relationships. So I think it could be either. It kind of depends, I think, on when the wounding happens, at what stage, and in what sort of relationship. I've seen many partners who just have a breach there, just with the partner, but they have a pretty solid, secure attachments with their children, with, you know, friends, with their spirit, you know, their community, and they're able to see those differently. But then there are some, when the trauma is high enough, it can feel like everyone's unsafe. And I think once the trauma lies down, we can kind of work with that a little bit and recognize, oh, this was the injury, not everybody else. We can start to kind of calm that fear down, but I think it can be either.
And I was thinking too, when you were sharing about this, that, you know, I hear often from partners who feel foolish that they love, like you were talking about, I love them and hate them. You know, it's, I love this person, even though they betrayed me so deeply, but I still love them. And, you know, and it's this, you know, and kind of like, you know, I feel foolish. I must be crazy. I mean, that whole thing where they're looking at themselves as flawed for loving someone who's deeply broken in many instances.
Right. That is very, very common. But I think that's kind of one of the healing pieces with partners. They have to figure out how to not take on shame of the addiction, even though it's hard not to. It's hard not to question self and wonder, why didn't I, you know, all those questions that sometimes a partner can ask themselves. But that's, again, part of the healing. It's hard not to go there. Pretty common.
And I'm hoping for you, as you're getting back together, that you both have your separate support, but you're also working with someone who can help you navigate, because, you know, it will be different. And, you know, there are, you know, one of the things we have for our Couples Healing from Betrayal workshop is grieving losses together. And I think that that's such an integral component, because there are losses for each of you, but there's losses for the relationship and what you thought you had and all of that. And I don't think people really naturally go to that. And so I think it's an important part to have somebody help guide you and support you. But again, you have your support, your partner has their support, and then hopefully you're working with somebody that can help you navigate the couple and reintegration.
Absolutely.
So the next one is, I understand about the role of shame in addiction, but what would you say about an addict who is not in treatment, who really doesn't seem to feel or exhibit any shame? In other words, doesn't think he needs treatment, refuses to stop acting out with affair partners, doesn't seem to have remorse for what he has done to his partner.
That would probably be the opposite extreme of, there's shame and feeling and acting in shame with, humiliation and embarrassment and all that. And then there's being shameless. That's kind of the other end of the spectrum of shame. And in this case, I'm not sure if someone refuses to get treatment, stop doing behaviors, acting out, I would question that person's desire at all to change, or maybe aren't in a position where they want to do anything different. And they may not have shame in the traditional way. Shame fuels most addiction, but not all. And that it's rare for that to be. That would be more of a narcissistic kind of a thing. Somebody who doesn't have remorse or empathy for the people that they may be hurting. It could just be they're not ready. They just might not be ready. So with most people, shame is there, even if they are, like I said, shameless. It's there because that's another defense. I'm pretending I'm okay. I'm like I'm putting up this wall, and it could be I have just numbed out my feelings to a degree that I can't even feel my shame. It's there. And once I decide that I'm tired of living that life, if I ever decide that, usually that's a pretty hard reality to face, because I haven't been facing it all along. I haven't been aware of or I haven't been acknowledging the damage that I'm causing myself and others. So it doesn't mean that this person does not have shame. It just means that it's not showing up in the remorseful, contrite, but humiliated and embarrassed and not good enough ways that we would typically see that with somebody who's ready to change. That's what I would say about shame. And shame is so different for every person, how it shows up. How it shows up for me is really connected to my own internal belief systems and my history and the things that I've experienced in my life. So it shows up for me in a variety of ways. It shows up for me about being a parent a lot. That's something I have to battle frequently, like not being good enough or, oh, I messed that up or whatever, it shows up in my life. It shows up in a variety of ways, but other people, that's not even a thing. They feel shame about the fact they didn't finish college, or I don't know, or anytime they make a mistake at work, or, everybody responds with shame differently. But I think we all have our own battles with it. And awareness is everything. I always say that. I don't know that I fixed all my shame, but I'm pretty aware about where it shows up for me. And that's a gift because I can recognize it and challenge it.
So agree. And I, when I'm reading this, I was thinking, it's there. It's just so trussed up. I have this, I find addicts to be very compartmentalized, and, I'm not going to let emotions, oh my goodness, empathy or, shame touch me. And for addicts, I find that, we can't even imagine how we would cope with life without doing our acting out. So we'll keep telling ourselves that, the affair partner and all of this stuff is, we're not hurting anybody. We deserve it, whatever message we have to do. You probably have been on the blame shifting, you've been gaslighted, all of those things. That continues to be a protection so that the addict can continue to act out and do whatever they're doing. but I agree with Kim too, that this person is clearly not ready. We don't change as humans, not just addicts. We don't change until the it's easier to change than to stay the same. So clearly, that person's still caught up in it's going to be way too hard to change. There are a few people, but Dr. Rob has talked about, in the thousands of people he's treated over the years, he's only had a handful of people who were true narcissists that had no ability to change. But narcissism is part of addiction. It's all about me. Even the addicts that are narcissists, like, oh, I'm so not worthwhile, I'm so whatever, that's just another form of narcissism. It's still all about me, rather than looking for help and how I can change in a positive way. So,
well, shame, this is kind of my own little idea or saying, but shame puts us on a me planet.
yes.
When I'm on me planet, it doesn't matter if I'm feeling embarrassed or I'm feeling better than you. I'm still on me planet, and everything that happens has to do with me. So it's impossible to engage effectively in any relationship when I'm on me planet, because I'm alone on me planet. So when shame shows up, the world is revolving around whatever's going on with me, whether it's me being awesome or me being a piece of crap. It's still all about me, because I'm not. And I was thinking about the question. There was a part in there that said, and feels no remorse. And what would it take for someone to feel remorse? It would mean they would have to consider their behavior. They would have to sit and at least think, wow, I wonder, I feel bad that I'm hurting somebody that I love. Without remorse, and that could potentially, bring feelings of shame. But if I am blocking, like Tammy said, pent up or blocking or walling off all emotion, remorse, contrition, regret, any of that, I'm not going to, so I'm going to stay pent up over there because I'm not ready to feel. I don't want to feel. Feeling is painful. And I agree with Dr. Rob. I have, in the many years I've done this, I could count probably on one hand when I've treated a narcissistic personality disorder. And that is different than narcissistic behavior. So there's an actual diagnosis for a narcissist. That means I lack empathy, the ability to feel for anyone else. They do exist, but they're very rare. But all addicts have narcissistic behavior because they're serving themselves, obviously, if I'm lying and deceiving. And so that in and of itself is very self-centered. It's not other-centered. So I just want to say that there's a difference between narcissistic behavior and a narcissistic disorder, narcissism as a disorder. That's important to know.
Yes. And while I swear every partner is going to go, mine's one of the few, because it feels like that. It feels like that's where they're at. And, they are in active addiction, but, and unfortunately I hear too often from people who, he's been sober 9 months, a year, whatever, 2 years, whatever. And he's still blaming her, to use heterosexual, but he's still blaming her, and stay out of my stuff, whatever, and I'm like, that they might have stopped the behavior, but they haven't gotten any recovery skills, so they're still all compartmentalized and not willing to look at things. So that's always unfortunate to me, because life is about, in my opinion, growing and and learning to do differently. So okay, so next question. What should I expect when my husband comes home from a sex addiction treatment center? That depends.
Yes, it does. That was a good start.
Yeah.
It really depends on the person. It depends on what they learned when they were there. Most of the time, and I say that carefully because this is not across the board, usually coming out of treatment, I feel pretty enlightened and I feel raw, because I've been doing a lot of hard work and without any outside influence, like, the boss and the kids and all that kind of stuff. But I feel pretty raw. I've probably been drinking out of a fire hose for some time. There's some vulnerability there sometimes. But I think it's often a peaceful time because there's a lot more insight, usually a grown desire to change. And that's not again, that's not everybody. I've seen people come out of treatment centers not better. And that's because they probably didn't want to be there in the first place. And, they were blocked even in treatment. So it's not magic for everybody. It only is magic and helpful if the person goes in completely willing and wanting change, like therapy. It's the same idea. It's only as effective as the person wanting help has a desire to want help. So I think there probably is, it depends on where this person went, but there should be an aftercare plan in place for that person, meaning before they leave the treatment center, they should have a very clear plan that they should be able to share with you if you're the partner or parent or whatever, like how many meetings they're going to go to, what therapy is going to look like, how they're going to handle certain situations at work. Like they're going to have a plan in place to keep them as stable as possible. And that is hopefully something that, can be shared and not to be manipulated or, you're not following your plan. That's not what partners do, but so that you have some amount of safety with that person coming out, with your husband coming out of recovery, as to his plan to stay grounded and stable in his recovery. And if he's not doing the things that he planned on doing with his, he told you about, say he's out for 6 weeks and he's suddenly stopped going to meetings, I definitely, if I was a partner, would be challenging that. You told me 6 weeks ago you were going to be going to groups and you're not, and that feels very frightening for me. We don't control it, but you can definitely, hopefully you guys can talk about that. Those are some thoughts.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things, every treatment center is different. With ours, the spouses get what to expect. And, there's information and it talks about, some of that. And there hopefully is filters on there, on their technology that isn't going to you, but that is going to a sponsor therapist or whatever, so that there's, the accountability, the aftercare plan, 100% agree. Hopefully the treatment center has guided you, if you don't already have support, making sure that you have support, because, he's going to come back somewhat different. Hopefully he's learned some things. And I kind of, we as Seeking Integrity, we get a fair number of guys that aren't necessarily willing when they come in. So I think they have to be willing to just get there, and then I found with our clinical team, unfortunately, some of them, it takes, the first week and, just to kind of break through that, where they're still blame shifting and going, I'm only here because of this, or it's really that person's fault or whatever, name calling, et cetera. So we really, work on that, but I think it depends on, on the center, but my point is, ideally you both have your own support, and have a plan for, continuing to work together. But it's a journey. I tell partners, that are calling, that we aren't going to fix him in the time that we have him. Like nothing's going to magically fix them, but we can give them a solid foundation on which to build. And we want to start having them be able to be honest, with themselves and with you. And again, if you're taking a person who has for decades been lying to themselves and everyone else, they aren't going to just magically, be, telling the truth all the time. So it's a process, but, hopefully you see progress, over time, but it takes time. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, manage the expectations for sure. And no, I really think coming out of treatment like that is sometimes the beginning of recovery, in a lot of ways. Not that what they did before that didn't matter, but it's really the beginning of really knowing myself. If they went inpatient, they probably were battling big time to get it before. So manage those expectations. But yes, to me, it's just great. We have a clean slate. Let's start here. Let's create a plan for both of us and keep the journey going.
Yeah,
but
and it's
good
having those
perspective.
conversations, about, what healthy boundaries and how, and if you're quarantined, how is he going to have, what meetings is he going to? How is he going to have time with his sponsor where he can talk? I mean, all of those things. Some of it's just logistics, to have a plan, again, for, that you have a plan for each of you. It's really easy to fall back into the same dance you were doing before. And so having a plan for doing things differently, it's challenging because, we by nature want to do the same thing. So, have a plan for how, how we're going to navigate this in a different way.
Yes.
Okay. What are some boundaries you might suggest for a partner of a longtime addict who is in early recovery? Yay, early recovery. So that's
Yes,
good.
that is amazing. Wow. So that's a big question. It really depends if you're the partner and you're referring to the addict in your life who is just starting their recovery process. Remember, I think the most important thing to remember, whatever boundaries that you set, is that they're always about safety. They're not about control, and it will be tempting to want to, manage it a little bit. It's like so hopeful and I want to help it along. Wanting to help isn't a problem. It's just how we help and the way that we help. Early on, if I'm a partner, a loved one of an addict, I really want them to develop their own moral compass. I want them to develop their own sense of right and wrong, and with my guidance, meaning this is what I need to feel safe. When you do this, this is what I feel, and what I want instead is this. And if you can't do that for me, then the consequences will be this. So that's the format of a boundary. And it's all about safety for yourself, for the relationship, for the family, for the home. Um, so when you think about boundaries, you really, as a partner, have to think about your needs. What are my needs in this relationship right now? And remember, boundaries that you need today, you might not need tomorrow or next week, or, just think about the day. What is it that I need to feel safe and secure? Do I need accountability? Do I need him to or her to check in? Do I need a certain amount of connection every week? Do I need conversations to go like this? Do I need this not to happen? So those are the things. I think some of the general boundaries that you'll want to set, that you'll want to consider, and I would really encourage you to do these with help. It's super hard to set boundaries in our own head sometimes. It gets kind of messy in there. So a support group, friends that at least have some understanding of your needs and can support you in a healthy way, a therapist, any of that will be really, really useful, even a group. But I would think boundaries around uh, safety in the home, like maybe time, maybe what kind of time I need, what kind of, what you might need from his recovery, like for you. Maybe it would be boundaries around our conversations, our arguments, boundaries around when we go out and what I need when we're out and about. I don't know, but it's really going to be getting into your needs and figuring out how to get those met. I know that's probably broader than you wanted, but boundaries are such a big conversation. But it's such a good question because they are absolutely imperative to establish for the relationship to be healthy.
This topic comes up on webinars, on podcasts. There's a book, and I have not read this book, but it's called Moving Beyond Betrayal, the 5-Step Boundary Solution for Partners of Sex Addicts. So Moving Beyond Betrayal. It's on Amazon. Yeah, Vicki Tildwell Palmer.
It's a very good book for partners. There's a few things in there that can be, I've heard partners say that are a little tiny bit triggering or, activating to their trauma. So not bad things, just reminders of some of the consequences of sex addiction. So just giving you that. But there's also Boundaries by Townsend and Cloud. It is the old Bible to boundaries, but still very relevant around boundaries. I would recommend as well. So good questions. Keep thinking about boundaries always.
Not sure if this is related to shame or a different issue. Is it possible that some addicts don't experience their behavior as a breach of integrity, meaning they don't actually think it is wrong to cheat and lie?
Yes, is the short answer. That is possible. It could be shame. It could be what we talked about earlier in the podcast, you know, kind of deflecting that and avoiding my feelings. And it could be, I really don't have a moral ground or a foundation about right and wrong or good or bad about this issue. That could be really painful, because if one person isn't okay with it and the other person is, then we've got a really big chasm there to discuss and to breach. But that is absolutely possible.
Yeah, I've actually heard someone, and it was a cultural thing. I'm not going to say where, but it was in a different country than the U.S. And in this particular culture, you know, it was not. I mean, it was common, and so it was, but it was a problem, you know, in this particular relationship. So, you know, I do think. You know, and it isn't all about how you were raised or whatever, but, you know, I know many people that are like, well, you know, that's what happened in my family. And, you know, so I could see how some people might not perceive that as a problem. However, you know, in a committed relationship, when we've agreed to this, you know, if one person decides to go do something completely different, you know, it breaches the relationship, you know, the agreed upon terms of the relationship, so to speak. So,
well, and then I have a big decision to make. If I, and what do I consider cheating and lying? I mean, we're going to have to define that. That's going to be, let's talk, what does it mean to cheat and lie? What does that mean? Like, you know, sexually acting out with other people? Does that mean cheating on my taxes? Does that mean, you know, there's a huge range of what that could mean to somebody. Somebody might be okay with a white lie, and some people are not okay with anything that, and I'm not trying to be the moral guide here. I just feel like in a committed relationship, like Tammy said, we have to be clear about that. And then if we are on different pages, we have to decide if we're okay with that. Can I live with that or not, is really what it is, because we don't really change other people. That's not a thing. We can try, but we can invite people and we can improve, but it's going to be something I want to do, not something that somebody forces me to do.
Although I think setting boundary, like if I'm really clear, well, this is my boundary, and if we're going to be in this relationship, and you know, and it's going to, you know, look like this for the two of us, then I'm not okay with you having sex with somebody else. I mean, this is just me, but you know, it's one of those things where if you're, you know, I think it's okay to go, this is the boundary. And so you can continue to do that, but then this is the negative consequence of that. So I'm not changing you, but I'm inviting you into, you know, a different direction.
Well, we teach people how to treat us by what we allow and what we don't allow. And we do that with boundaries. We do that by stating what we need and what there's negotiables and non-negotiables in relationships. Some things are needs and some things are wants. Needs are typically non-negotiable. So if fidelity is a need that I have, for instance, as an example, and I need that for safety, and my partner doesn't, fidelity is not an issue for that other person, and so they're willing to cheat, or it's okay if you do, if you are, you know, if it's an open marriage, whatever, then that's not going to work for the person that needs that for safety. So I can set the boundary, and then but the boundary would require, obviously there's going to be natural consequences, and there may be consequences I have to, if I'm the boundary setter, I might have to enact. I might have to say, I can't be in a relationship like this because it's too unsafe for me, and my needs are going unmet, and our needs cannot go unmet for very long without breaking the back of a relationship.
I remember Dr. Rob got asked a longer time ago, you know, what about micro cheating? And his response was, micro cheating, it's still cheating. So, you know, there isn't like, well, it's only a little bit of cheating. So
you could ask yourself about micro honesty.
Oh, that's a good one.
If you were to switch that, am I okay with a little bit of honesty? You know, but again, our moral compasses, how we feel or what we believe is right or wrong, is something we have to work out with that relationship. because there are some people who, there are certain things that they wouldn't, either culturally or their belief systems are different. So
Yes, and then, you know, if you can't negotiate it, you know, then there's definitely choices. So okay, so the next one, it looks like it goes together, so I'm going to read the next two. What do I do when I feel rejected by my spouse who betrayed me by his current behavior? Even a small thing, I get triggered. My spouse stonewalls me as I go into full-blown trigger mode and start lashing out. Later, he demands an apology for my specifically spelling out any false accusation or put downs. Yet he refuses to take any responsibility for being the source of my trigger from his adultery and porn addiction. My D-Day for his affair was 2 years ago, and the porn D-Day was 4 weeks ago. I'm starting to believe my husband is a narcissist. Any thoughts on what to do if that's the case? We're both listening.
welcome, both of you. Painful. It sounds like you guys are in a little bit of a painful cycle of struggling to communicate, you know, like, and the fact that the affair D-Day being 2 years ago, but the porn D-Day being only 4 weeks ago is probably reactivating. I don't typically use trigger for partners because it feels like a trigger for sure. I understand the context for sure, but it activates your trauma. It activates the betrayal I felt 2 years ago, because even though this isn't maybe a live affair, this is still going outside of the marriage to meet a need and leaving me out of that decision. So I think what's really important is that both people have to take responsibility. You're not responsible for for the activation of your trauma. We're always responsible for our behavior, always, you know, and we could be really mad and really, you know, we could rage, we could, you know, just go into a complete kind of meltdown, so to speak. But everybody, each person, each one of you has to decide, no matter how upset I am, and this is how shame shows up in a relationship, and fear and trauma, is we get into these difficult conversations where I feel triggered or activated, and then my shame shows up if I might be the spouse, the husband who, you know, has cheated or betrayed, and my defenses go up because I feel like I have no right to be treated that, you know, and maybe I feel like a bad person anyway, and that makes me feel worse, and so I get defensive and I demand an apology. Bottom line is we have to set some boundaries for the relationship as well, how we communicate about hard things. And for the offender in the relationship, for the, you know, the one who has been unfaithful, you're going to have to sit in a lot of these difficult emotional moments with your spouse, because she is just dealing with something you've maybe been dealing with for a really long time, but it's news to her. And like grief, trauma, we don't get to tell someone how long they feel trauma or how long they get to grieve. That is very individual to that person. And I want to say too, it's weird, I had this thought today before the webinar I wanted to talk about. I often hear people say, it's so unsafe, whether it's the addict or the partner, you know, she just keeps bringing up the past and that's not safe, so I'm not talking about it. And that's not unsafe, that's uncomfortable. There's a difference between feeling unsafe and feeling uncomfortable. It is not comfortable to have to sit and listen to somebody be hurt and to say, how could you do this to me? And I'm so mad at you and whatever. And it's not easy for someone to listen to, hey, I want to tell you what I've been up to the last 10 years that you didn't know. Those are really hard things and they're uncomfortable, but they're not necessarily unsafe. They're only unsafe if we're causing legitimate harm to each other. If we are hurting each other, raging, and there are name calling and things like that that could be really damaging to the relationship. And it's not necessarily justified by the trauma, but it's, you know, the emotions, we go limbic, we go in the part of our brain that isn't higher thinking when we're in our trauma. And when we're in our shame and our addiction, we go to the same part of the brain. So we're not thinking clearly, and sometimes we react poorly and we say things that we might not otherwise say. So I would get some help in that, help navigating that. This would be a perfect thing to sit down with a therapist and say, we're struggling to communicate about this, and I am so mad, and I don't want to apologize. And, and for the addict, I feel like, I'm getting verbally berated. I just feel like, maybe both of you are going to need some relational boundaries there and some tools to help you navigate and communicate in effective ways. When you guys get triggered or activated, you probably need a timeout. We probably need to stop the conversation. Nothing good's going to happen when we go there. It just isn't. So we might need what I call a moratorium. We might need to call a break. Like, let's take 15 minutes. Let's take 20 minutes. And then let's try it again. And we might still be there. So let's try tonight after the kids go to bed. But we have to parent ourselves too, in those moments. And validate the fact that there's a lot of pain there and it's hard to know how to respond. But there are ways to navigate this. And I hope you guys will stick with it. And I hope you have help with this and navigating it, and recognize this, the last disclosure is 4 weeks old. So that, you got hit by a truck 4 weeks ago. And so things are going to be pretty raw right now.
So a bunch of resources out of the doghouse. It talks about rebuilding trust. Dr. Rob wrote that book specifically for that. Help Her Heal is a book Carol Jurgensen Sheets wrote that I've heard good things about, haven't read that one. The Couples Healing from Betrayal workshop is specifically for helping this. But one of the things I keyed in on was D-Day for Affairs 2 years ago, but then porn addiction 4 weeks ago. And I don't hear any recovery. So I don't hear anything toward, so my suspicion is, and this is just from a brief thing, but that there was no recovery. It was, I stopped this behavior, but I've been full blown into, looking at porn. So my brain is still hijacked. I'm still activated in, the acting out. And so him getting qualified help to address the behaviors and to address the underlying issues. We talk all the time about, and we started off with this one with, the addictive behavior is the symptom, but there's all the underlying issues. And, so getting support, to qualified support to work through that so that you can be in a different place. But navigating, negotiating the 20-minute timeout, ready to talk, having specific times to talk, but doing the dance of, I'm mad, lashing out, you could play the same, recording over and over again, because it's a pattern that, keeps repeating, with a different reactivation perhaps, but you're both here. So I want to honor that. I want to let you know that lots of people, do find a path to healing, through this. So glad you're here. Keep coming back. Lots of resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. And because tomorrow is the Super Saturday Recovery Summit on intherooms.com, I would invite you to join that tomorrow too. Dr. David Fawcett will be kicking it off at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We've got Rachel Levy talking about healthy sex or healthy love. And then Lulu Cook is talking about nutrition, which I've heard people talking about the COVID-15. And so, but we don't always put nutrition and taking good care of ourselves in a more holistic way as part of our recovery process. And that's true for partners too. Just supporting good things, all the way around is important. So invite you to join that. Thank you, Kim Buck, as always. It's always a delight to work with you. And keep coming back. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you guys. Take care. Thank you for your questions, and come back.